As a link to what we know and what we need to know about planning for assessing learning spaces, the LSC presents stories from the LSC community about lessons learned from diverse experiences in planning learning spaces and about emerging assessment strategies to determine the impact and influence of new and repurposed spaces on the experience of learning, as well as on the institutional culture.
Before I joined AAC&U, which I've been there for right at a year now. Before that, I was the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Georgia. I did that position for 5 years. And then I was involved with CTLs and learning technologies for the previous 15 years at Virginia Tech, and been teaching throughout all of that time and using a variety of different learning spaces. And I guess about 20 years ago, when I first started teaching and going to conferences, I had the realization that space in many ways kind of dictates pedagogy. I never felt it more acutely than whenever I would go to a conference. And a lot of the conferences I would go to were teaching and learning conferences. My background's in education, so a lot of teaching stuff. And there were multiple times that I can remember going to a conference, having great ideas for something I wanted to do in the workshop, and then I'd walk into a room that looked something like this, and the chairs are linked together on one side or the other. And so there really was some difficulty in doing some of the interactive group work that I wanted to do. And certainly space doesn't entirely dictate pedagogy, but there's a sense that, okay, we're going to start to struggle. And then if you're in a classroom that you're in for day after day, week after week, and all of the seats are always facing forward, it kind of whispers to you, lecture, lecture, lecture. So as I got more involved in administration and higher education, learning spaces became something that I was very interested in. And at Georgia, we have one of the larger CTLs in the country. We have about 50 employees, and in addition to faculty development and future faculty development, the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, we had an ed research mission. We managed all the university's learning technologies, but we also had oversight for classrooms and classroom support. So I want to share really sort of 3 core notions regarding of strategies that we undertook, and then share some ideas regarding assessment. So one thing that we undertook is, the campus has about 800 classrooms that are sort of centrally managed, and then there's a variety of other sort of informal learning spaces, conference rooms, and the like that are sort of way outside of our purview. Often we didn't know these rooms existed until something might happen in them that required some remediation. But because there's a lot of construction going on at all times, we worked with our architect's office several years ago to develop a set of learning environment design specifications that really looked at the full gambit. And so this document, anytime that any building construction firm was hired to do anything on campus, they would receive this document, especially around learning spaces. And so they would kind of have a sense of what the requirements or expectations were at the institution. So you can see there's a range of things that we touch on in that document, though the lengthier sections are around sort of classroom specifications, audiovisual systems, furniture, things like that. And this document's available online, open access. If you just search for learning space design specifications, UGA, it'll take you right to this. But in addition to sort of specifically articulating what we were looking to, what we expect, we also provided these schematics. And so in the top left corner here, we describe everything regarding these large lecture halls, what would be like the appropriate angle or a maximum angle that students in the front would have to look up at a screen, for instance. In the bottom left corner, we have recommendations regarding if you're building new lecture spaces, try to have lecture spaces where 2 rows are on the same level so that students can turn around and actually sit at a table with other students that are on the same level. So even in large lecture spaces, thinking about collaborative learning. We also had schematics for active learning spaces that were for different sized classrooms. How many projectors would you have in these rooms? What would a setup look like for 45 seats or 99 seats and the like? So lots of this that was articulated for those that are actually building learning spaces to ensure that we don't have as many retrofit problems as we sometimes have in classrooms. I know whenever I got to the University of Georgia, there were a number of things that really surprised me about classrooms, and some of them were classrooms that were built just within the last 3 years. So there was some interesting work that we had to do just because those that were in charge of designing and building weren't given good specifications from the very beginning. So in addition to shifting sort of the narrative where we have this foundational perspective regarding what expectations were for learning spaces on campus, we also incorporated a broad stakeholders planning process where we involve faculty and students and the architect's office and facilities management and academic affairs leadership and teaching specialists, and of course, faculty from within the departments and their departmental support staff, those that might be playing a role in supporting those classrooms. Also, we have classroom support staff at the University of Georgia, and that is different than our IT support staff. Classroom support handles mostly AV options, but we would have a big team of people come together as we would think about revising classrooms each year. And of course, we had a refresh cycle that, depending on the spaces, we tried to have a refresh cycle that was in the 5 to 7 year range. But as we moved forward in my tenure there, we brought together a large team to make sure that those who were teaching in the space and those that were supporting those folks would have the appropriate input as work and rooms were designed. So beyond building the spaces and ensuring that those that are sort of designing the spaces and actually doing the building were in the loop, we also were cognizant of that, where the rubber meets the road are faculty. And of course, being the CTL, faculty development was a key component of what we do. So what we would often do, so like for instance, as a good example of this, we had a new science learning center that came online a couple of years ago. It was a $48 million facility with scale-up classrooms and active learning classrooms and lots of lab space in there, mostly STEM courses, of course, in a science learning space, as you might imagine. But we also found out, okay, so who's going to be teaching in those classrooms? And then we incentivized those faculty to participate in a faculty learning community model of sort of a fellows program where we would bring faculty together and review pedagogical options, model some of the pedagogies that you could do in such spaces, and then give faculty an opportunity to build some of their own curriculum and try out some things with their colleagues, and in some cases, some students. So in the photographs that you see here, these are from what we termed our MAL within the CTL. The MAL stood for, those letters stand for the Model Active Learning Classroom. So we had walls that you could write on and all of the furniture was configurable, but yet it was a small space so that it very much could function as a community or learning community space. So faculty development was a key component of the work that we do. And so I guess, Jeannie had pitched sort of the question to me, like pie in the sky, what would assessment look like in days and weeks and months and years to come regarding learning spaces? And I think there's some work that's already being done. I think that the EDUCAUSE has the LSRS, which is the learning space rating system. It's kind of a check sheet that you can look over as you examine a learning space and think about how you might remodel it. But that's really kind of just a baseline or a first step. What we really want to look at are educational research models, SOTL models, scholarship teaching learning models, where we actually look at what's going on in a classroom and how students are behaving and learning. The question that we often put to ourselves is, well, where might we find data regarding pedagogy and learning space design? And a lot of the data would come from those that are in those spaces. So focus groups and surveys of faculty, same with students, talking with students. Also, we do behavioral observation studies to see exactly how students are moving themselves through the space. And then sometimes faculty have specific assignments and they would like to just sort of chart what's actually going on in the classroom whenever they're trying some active learning approaches. And so actually watching the students, see if they're engaging, see if they're multitasking, how might we tweak that pedagogical practice so that it further engages students or ensures that they are indeed actually engaged in the learning activities. But I think ultimately, the pie in the sky is really learning outcomes achievement. How well are students actually learning in these spaces? So I think thinking down the road about assessment strategies, really pushing the envelope and looking at learning outcomes and being able to tie learning outcome achievement back indeed to the pedagogies in the classroom, how the furniture, the space is being leveraged to achieve those learning outcomes.
We invite you to visit the LSC website for further stories from the field about the process of planning, of focusing on users in the context of focusing on the future for learning and learning spaces. Our website provides links to national reports that are major resources for planners at all stages of attending to Spaces That Matter, a portfolio of spaces that work, and collections of essays about audacious questions for planning that go beyond current practice. Information about upcoming activities related to learning spaces within the broader LSC community is also posted. The LSC is for and by the LSC community. Join us.